what are some stereotypes or misconceptions about veterans that you see this story challenging? There's some ideas about what veterans are, and this story, I think, is challenging some of them. And I'm asking you maybe to help me articulate what we're challenging in even telling this story at all.
I think stereotypes, you know, there's a certain stereotype for people that go into the military, which, you know, the stand tall, you know,
Right.
masculine, you know, and wanting to do the rough jobs and infantry and, you know, that stereotype of, you know, who joins the military, you know. Not everybody's like that.
You know, there's so many stereotypes of veterans, and all stereotypes come off with some base of fact, so I think it comes down to, you know, your personal experience with veterans, but really, you know, we're not that much different than anybody else.
If I'm, like, I had a stereotype when I even asked the question. So we're talking about veterans being in lockstep. I can't do anything unless somebody tells me where to go. I can't, you know, I'm lost without that sort of structure of the military. Like, that's a stereotype.
Yeah.
And then a veteran entrepreneur is shattering that stereotype, right? Because you're creating your own structure, you're creating your own direction, you're meeting goals that you create for yourself. So I think one stereotype could be that somehow the military beats out creativity, right? Because you're just doing whatever you're told. And that's not happening here.
I think it depends too. Like, my career path in the military promoted creativity.
So what was your career path?
Yeah, so my last job, I was a protective service agent, you know, dressed more like you than a traditional soldier most days. And the whole goal was to make sure we killed our boss. And so we had to be creative on the way we drove and the routes we took and the way we planned. We had full mission autonomy though. So I feel like all that helped me where, you know, the traditional Joe in the Army being told what to do. I think it just really depends on that person's career path and the kind of the way they went.
So the misconception that I see is that since we have technology, it's easy to communicate and that it should be a non-issue, that, you know, like what you said, so many people would get frustrated at the spouse because they wouldn't answer. And I would find myself doing the same when I'd call my son. I'd want to talk to him when I wanted to, when I had time. And I'm like, what if tomorrow doesn't come and I didn't get to call and talk to him? And that sort of pressure is not something that you should be dealing with on a deployment when you're trying to keep you and your guys safe. Like, you need to be 100% focused. So those sort of distractions are why a lot of people pull back. And so I think the misconception is that communication is easy because there's technology. And I actually find that it's a lot more difficult.
I would say, too, another misconception would be the idea that when you marry someone who's in the military, you're going to get to go on all these awesome adventures together. And so on the one end, it's like, oh, it's going to be doom and gloom and you're going to break up if he deploys or she deploys. But then on the other side of it, it's like, oh, you get to go all over the world and do all these awesome things. Then you kind of forget about the hard parts. And so when you get there, it makes it that much more challenging.
So, I mean, the common stereotype I'm always harping on is, you know, don't underestimate which one served, because you don't know by looking at the two of you who served. And it's offensive to think otherwise. So I think just keep in mind that, you know, you don't know who served. Mm-hmm. That's my biggest thing.
I think when you think of a veteran, it's part of who I am. You know, whenever I think of what I did as a veteran, you know, everybody's like, thank you for serving. Well, you're welcome, you know. But there's a lot of other veterans out there as well, you know. And I think what I did for my country, you know, I'm proud of what I did. Just like me being, you know, trans is just a part of who I am and what I do. Yes, Gage and I do challenge that, because when people see us at the VA, they have absolutely, when they see us in the hall, they do not know that we're trans. They have absolutely no idea. They might think that we're just friends. So they might not even know that we're married. They might not know that we're a couple. So, you know, I think that we actually challenge a lot of things when you're talking about us. You know, we are, we challenge a lot whenever it comes to the VA, and when
We're
it comes
definitely
to
not the stereotypical. We're not
doctors.
same. We're not the type of people that most people think that we are, I guess. Is what.
Yeah. You know, I had one of his doctors tell me the reason why he was having so many problems was because he was going against nature. You know, that was at the VA, and you know, we had to work through that. You know, that was an opinion of somebody.
Right.
You know, and I think that it's challenging, but at the same time, it's who we are.
I am curious, maybe if, Logan, you could talk a little bit more about, it seems to me I've met more people who are part of dual military families, and definitely while the rate of people serving in the military has gone down, the rate of women in the military serving has definitely gone way up, right? And I think it's still going to go up. You know, I think they're 18% now, and they project that it will probably double, I think, in the future. So what is that like? I mean, and your whole story is about that misconception, but maybe talk a little bit more about that if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I honestly think that it has more advantages than disadvantages. So of course it has its, hurdles, and it sucks. You spend a lot of time apart, which you do when you're not dual military. But the best part is I can have my husband in a combat zone. He was at another FOB, but it was 30 miles or so down the road, and I at least knew he was close, and I could potentially see him depending on the runs that I did. And the second biggest thing from that I can be with him a lot more than I couldn't be, is he gets it. Like, he gets me.
Right.
Like, he understands when I'm like, when I was sifting through emails, almost all of my emails said, sorry I didn't call you today, I'm just too exhausted. Sorry I didn't talk to you last night, I was too exhausted. Sorry I seemed out of it, I'm just exhausted. And you would be like, how do you not have time to talk to me? I get it, you're deployed, but you don't even have 5 minutes to talk to me? No, I don't. And he was extremely sympathetic when I came home, and I was very just like, no one touch me, no one come near me, everyone just leave me alone. And he just let me be me. And the fact that he was patient and he could sympathize with what I was going through and the demand put on me physically, mentally, and emotionally, he just got it. And he could be sympathetic and be patient with me. And I think that is why we made it out, is because we were dual military. I think if he hadn't had an inside look on what it's like, and neither had I don't think we would have made it.
So one thing that you mentioned earlier was, do you guys get any training on how to communicate with your families? And they said, well, we get a lot of training on how not to. And so honestly, I think that's a big thing, is taking the time to actually work with families on how to communicate and what to expect on a deployment, because that's one thing that, like, I had no expectations when it came to communication. I knew they gave me all the details on where they were going to be. They would give me the details on, like, the kind of stuff that they would be doing, as much as they could share with the families. They didn't take the time to inform us on, like, what communication would look like for 9 to 12 months, or what kind of effect that has on people. And so I think that's something that needs addressed, is actually taking time to teach people how to communicate with each other when they're so far apart.
I'll say, when I heard about what you guys did, it shattered a conception for me, right? It did. It was creative and romantic and very personable, and it sort of took it allowed you guys to be intimate in a way that was over a long distance. And I think if I wouldn't know to do those things if I was in that situation, if nobody had shown me, right? Which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, everything's mission driven in the military. You don't do anything without a clear purpose and task and, success factors.
But at some point, like Charlinda in the video, she opens up telling us, I have this side project, right, that's never going to get off the ground, and I'm not going to do anything with it, and so I'm just supposed to pay attention to it. And then suddenly that's the thing that's taking over for her and providing her all of this intense leadership experience, right? That is, it's just hard to get anywhere, right? Like, for a 23-year-old.
Yeah. It's like prioritizing, what's more important at the time. and conquering that, and then going forth with the next thing. So, yeah, I think that too, society, they're looking at veterans in a different kind of light now, and that helps entrepreneurs to step forward and do a lot more than they have done in the past.
So did your dad get out of he was in the military during the Vietnam era, right?
Yes.
And then, so I mean, anybody that's been involved with the Veteran Voices Project for a long time, when we talk to Vietnam vets, we hear that same thing, like, it's so different now.
Yes.
It's so different now. It's so different now. I mean,
I can say that because I was his child, and the level of respect for veterans was not there as it is now. And I'm so glad to see people, society, step up to the plate and say, well, yeah, they have done this and this and that. Well, this is wonderful and good, so give them a chance. I see so many companies that veterans have put out that is amazing to me. It's just, I can't believe the work that they do. When my father was in the service and he got out, there wasn't that kind of camaraderie there for people who are out there, you know, just doing a day's work and trying to make $1 and raise their families and stuff like that. And there's a lot of respect there, and I just am overwhelmed, and I am joyed to know that she has colleagues like you to talk to.
That's a huge
and relate
compliment
to.
coming from you.
but we've seen people say to us, how can you work with veterans? Aren't you afraid? Right? Because there's an assumption that they're dangerous, right? And it's like, I'm in the safest office on campus. I don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, so how do we combat some of those misconceptions and stereotypes?
PTSD is one of the biggest elephants in the room when it comes down to hiring veterans. They've actually done a survey of HR managers across the Society of Human Resource Management. I think it was 56% said that PTSD is a concern when they look at hiring a veteran. The reality, National Institute of Health has done a study, and the reality of Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom is about 1 in 5 veterans has post-traumatic stress. And that's not all the way to the level of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
That's post-traumatic stress. That 1 in 5, 20%. You're going to see those same numbers with people who've experienced a traumatic event. They've seen that same rate with the first responders to Hurricane Katrina. Violent crime, accidents, weather events, military combat, sexual assault. There are a variety of things that could all create post-traumatic stress. So unfortunately, by painting the picture of post-traumatic stress as a real mental health concern, they've brushed veterans with a very, very broad brush, unfairly in some points. So they validated a real mental health need, but they did it so well that they basically colored all of us with that same brush. There is no link between post-traumatic stress and workplace violence. That's been studied. There is no statistical link whatsoever there. And I loved your comment that you're in the safest place on campus. I have to agree with that. You've got people who know how to respond to a crisis. When you have a situation like you had in during the tornadoes, or perhaps some of the other recent disasters or tragedies, you look at how military veterans respond. You have people that are specifically trained to react, and they're generally reacting in a positive direction.
Is it comfortable being the trailblazers that you are?
Yes,
Sometimes.
I'm pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Right.
I used to be really, really comfortable with it. It's been later here lately it's been more of a, do I really want to divulge this part of my life and that part of my life and to these people and those people? But
We were actually having a conversation on the way over here, and I said, I think that it's okay for us to be vulnerable, because I think that it shows courage, and for us to not, because when you talk about mental illness, when you talk about, when you talk about all the things that we have going on in our lives, right, there has to be some form of self-care. There has to be some form of, holy crap, I'm not okay today, right? But there also has to be a plan in place. And that's something that we get from the military. You plan
Yeah.
for the worst, but you hope for the best, but you're always planning. And that's what our training taught us, taught me anyway, was for me to have a plan in place for when something big happens, I know what to do, right? Something big happens to us, we have a plan in place, you know, I know what to do. You know, we have a lot of facets to our life, and I think that us showing vulnerability all the time makes us human, and
Yeah.
it puts us on a level that, you know, that people can relate to, I guess.
I've spent most of the last 18 years deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, usually as an embedded reporter. And for most of that time, listening to, encouraging people to tell their stories and writing their stories. And the reason why I was doing that is twofold. One is just to preserve their experiences because they are so unique and they're part of our national treasure. These are people that we have elected to send into harm's way, and they've done that and come back. And we owe it to them not just to listen to their stories, but to share them among ourselves so that we know what has happened as a result of our responsibility to do this. So a lot of these stories don't involve some huge dramatic movie-like kind of event, but it's, you know, deeply personal and so important for us out here to understand.